The survey vessel Quiet Measure hung in the shadow of Earth's moon like a held breath, and inside it, the C3 observation cadre had already decided what humans were. They were weak. The conclusion had been reached long before any C3 instrument turned toward the blue world below, because the C3 did not so much study a species as confirm the shape they expected it to have. Observer Prime Ian had led 4 such catalogues in her long career, 4 young worlds pinned and measured and filed away in the great index of the Reach, and none of them had surprised her. She did not expect this one to be different. She expected it to be quick. The C3 were a careful people. They lived in the cold gradients of a small orange star, in cities grown from patient coral and lit by bioluminescent tide, and they had learned across 10,000 generations that the universe was mostly a way of killing you slowly. Their bodies were long and pale and translucent at the extremities, built for economy, built to endure nothing more violent than the slow turning of seasons. A C3 who fell from a height of twice their own would shatter. A C3 whose core temperature dropped 4 degrees would sleep and not wake. A C3 who went 3 days without the mineral broth that fed their thin blood would begin to unravel at the cellular level, gently, apologetically, like a letter left in the rain. They knew their own fragility the way a person knows the sound of their own name, and out of that knowledge they had built everything: their ships, their laws, their long unbroken peace, and above all their science, which was the science of avoidance. To survive, the C3 had learned to measure danger precisely, and then never ever approach it. This made them very good at cataloging worlds. It made them extraordinary at ranking threats. And it made them, though none of them would ever have said so, incapable of imagining that anything truly dangerous could look ordinary. "Begin the summary," Ian said. Her second, an eager young analyst named Core, whose translucence had not yet clouded with age, spread his long fingers over the reading pool and let the data rise into the air as light. Charts unfolded. Numbers braided themselves into color. The Quiet Measure had been in orbit for 140 local days, listening, watching, sipping the planet's endless radio chatter and rendering it into meaning, and now the harvest of that patience arranged itself for judgment. "The subject species," Core recited, "designates itself by many names. The most common in the dominant transmissions is human. They are bipedal, endothermic, single-birth mammals of moderate size. Average mass falls within the lower middle band of catalogued sapients. They possess no natural armor, no venom, no ranged organic weaponry. Their skin is thin and tears easily. Their young are born helpless and remain dependent for nearly a fifth of their total lifespan, which is itself brief. A human is fortunate to see 90 of its planet's short years." "Fragile then," Ian said. "It was not a question, it was a filing." "By our metrics, yes." Core flicked a chart higher. "Their bones break under loads a Kelvasi child would ignore. Their unshielded bodies fail in vacuum within seconds. They cannot photosynthesize, cannot hibernate, cannot regrow a lost limb. They require sleep for nearly a third of every daily cycle or their cognition degrades. And Observer Prime, this is the detail I found most telling. They cannot survive without water for more than a few days, and without their strange combustible food for only a handful of weeks. They are, by the standard of the Reach, a species running constantly at the edge of its own extinction." A soft murmur moved through the cadre. It was the sound the C3 made in place of a laugh, not cruel exactly, but relieved. The relief of a fragile people discovering something more fragile than themselves. Ian let the murmur settle. She had heard it before, over 4 worlds, and she had learned to distrust the comfort in it. "And their world," she said. "You called it, in your preliminary note, a difficult one." Core's fingers hesitated. "Yes, that is the second finding. The homeworld is unusual." He drew up a globe of light, the blue planet turning slowly above the pool, and began to layer its horrors over it in glowing script. "Its gravity is heavy, nearly half again our own. Its atmosphere is thick and corrosive with free oxygen, a gas so reactive it can consume metal and flesh alike given time. The surface is scoured by storms that generate winds capable of flattening structures, by walls of water that rise from the seas, by discharges of raw electricity that fall from the sky and can kill in an instant. The temperature swings across a range that would end most catalogued life. There are regions of ice where exposed flesh dies in minutes. There are regions of heat where water boils from the body. There are pressures in the ocean depths that would crush our vessel. The very ground moves and splits without warning. And the biosphere, he paused, and something like unease flickered in his voice for the first time. The biosphere is saturated. Every surface teems with microscopic life, much of it hostile. The macroscopic predators are numerous and varied and armed with claws, fangs, venom, crushing strength. By every environmental metric we possess, Observer Prime, this is a death world. A high-index death world, one of the most lethal we have ever catalogued. Ian studied the turning globe. This, she thought, was the puzzle that always came in the third finding, and she waited for it, and Core delivered it. And yet, he said slowly, the humans live there, everywhere on it. In the ice and in the heat and the storms, on the shaking ground beside the killing seas. Not sheltered, not sealed away as we would be. They walk out into it. 9 billion of them, Observer Prime, on the open surface of a death world, unarmored, unafraid. The murmur did not come this time. The cadre had gone quiet. Ian let the silence hold for a moment, then dismissed it with a gesture. You are making the young analyst's error, Core, she said gently. You are confusing survival with strength. A weed survives in a crack in the stone. It is not therefore mighty. These humans are not strong. They are merely stubborn organisms bred by a cruel world to tolerate its cruelty. Tolerance is not power. A creature that has spent its whole existence being beaten does not become dangerous. It becomes accustomed to being beaten. That is all we are seeing. Endurance is the virtue of the prey animal. She turned from the globe. We will confirm this the proper way, not with planetary metrics which flatter the subject by measuring the whole species at once. We will do it the Sethri way. We will choose one, an ordinary one, unremarkable, unexceptional, a single average specimen, and we will observe it living an average life. And when we have watched one weak human do weak human things for a full seasonal cycle, we will have our answer, and we will file this world where it belongs, low, beneath us, noted and forgotten. How shall we select the subject? Core asked. At random, Ian said, deliberately. I will not have you choosing some champion of their kind, some warrior or leader, and calling it typical. Take the transmission census. Weight it toward the ordinary. Small settlement, common circumstances, no distinction of any sort. And young, choose a young one before their world has had time to teach it any special trick. A juvenile female, I think. Their females are on average smaller and lighter than their males, which will show us the true baseline of the species, the weakest common form. Find me the most unremarkable human child on that entire world, and let us prove, once and forever, that there is nothing here to fear. Core bent to the work. It took the ship's mind less than a day to sift 9 billion signals and return a single one. When the profile rose from the reading pool, the whole cadre gathered to look at their chosen specimen, and every one of them felt the same quiet satisfaction, because the ship had done exactly as it was told. Her name was Wren Alder. She was 13 of her world's years old. She lived in a small settlement of some 4,000 humans in the northern latitudes of the largest continent, a place of long cold and short light, where the winters came early and stayed late, and the sun in the deep season showed itself for only a few grudging hours a day. Her settlement had no importance. It produced nothing the wider human world prized. It was, the analysis noted, a place people left rather than came to. Her dwelling was small and old, and stood at the far edge of the settlement where the built ground gave way to black forest and a frozen river. She had a younger brother, 6 years old, named Tomas. Her female parent worked in the settlement's care house through the night hours, tending the sick and the aged, and returned home exhausted after the boy and girl had already gone to their sleep. There was no male parent recorded in the household. There was very little of anything recorded in the household. She is perfect, Core said, and he meant it as a scientist means it, perfectly ordinary, perfectly average, a flawless specimen of unremarkableness. Small, light, young, poor, no status, no training, no advantage of any kind. If the strongest thing about humans were their circumstances, this one would show us nothing at all. Then let us watch her show us nothing, Ian said. Deploy the observers, full spectrum. I want to see everything, her temperature, her heartbeat, the chemistry of her blood, the firing of her nerves. I want to measure the exact cost of an ordinary human day. Begin at her waking. The quiet measure carried observers finer than dust, motes of patient machinery that could ride a current of air unseen and unfelt, and it loosed a swarm of them into the planet's punishing atmosphere. They fell through the corrosive air, through the killing cold of the upper sky, and they settled like frost over the small dwelling at the edge of the black forest, and they watched, and they measured, and they sent home everything they saw. The first thing they saw was the dark. It was the deep of the northern winter, and the girl woke while the sky was still black. No light touched the window. The dwelling was cold. The observers registered the interior temperature and flagged it as a low-level survival concern, a temperature at which a Sethri would already be moving toward the sleep from which there is no waking. The girl's blood should have been slowing. Instead, the observers watched her small body simply generate heat against the cold, burning its own reserves to hold her core steady, a furnace of a thing kept alight by nothing but food and will, and they recorded the caloric cost of it and found it enormous. She did not lie still and wait for the light, as any sensible creature would. She rose in the dark. Ian leaned toward the reading pool. What is she doing? She is, Core consulted the flood of data. She is placing her feet on the cold floor. Her nerves are reporting pain from the temperature. We can see the signal traveling. She is ignoring it. She is standing. A pause. She is crossing the room to the sleeping form of the younger human, the brother. She is placing a covering over him, adjusting it. She is, the thermal reading suggests she has given him her own covering, observer prime. She is now colder than she was. Why, said Ian. Core had no answer. There was nothing in the metrics that explained it. A creature this close to its own thermal limit had just chosen to move closer to it, deliberately, for the benefit of another organism, and the cost was measurable and the benefit to herself was zero. The Sethri instruments could weigh the girl's blood and count her heartbeats and map every nerve as it fired, but they had no scale that measured the thing she had just done, and so they simply logged it as an anomaly and watched what came next. What came next was that the girl got dressed in the dark, in the cold, her fingers stiff and clumsy with it, and she went out into the Deathworld's morning as though it were nothing at all. The observers followed her out the door and the cadre watched through their eyes, and for the first time Ian felt faintly, at the very edge of her long, careful mind, the thing she had spent 4 worlds teaching herself not to feel. She named it privately and dismissed it. It was only the cold of the images. It was only the strangeness of a new world. It was not, she told herself, unease. The girl walked out under a black sky spitting ice, and the temperature the observers reported was one that would have killed every member of the cadre where they sat. And the girl pulled her thin covering tighter and put her head down against the wind and began, without hesitation, without complaint, without any apparent understanding that she was doing anything remarkable at all, to walk. The care house records show her school is 4 kilometers distant, Core said quietly. The settlement's transport does not run in the deep season. The route is on foot, through the forest, in this. How long, Ian asked, will it take her? At this pace, in this cold, over this ground, more than an hour, observer prime. And she does this every day. Every day, said Core, both directions. This is not an event. For her, this is not even a difficulty. The census marked her attendance as ordinary, unremarkable. He looked up from the pool and his young face had lost its satisfaction. Observer Prime, by every measure we hold, what this child does before her first meal would be, for us, a legendary act of survival, a thing sung about, a thing memorialized. And she does it in the dark, alone, half frozen, having given her own warmth away, and she thinks it is nothing. Ian did not answer at once. On the reading pool, the small figure moved through the black trees, 1 foot and then the other, breath streaming white, and the observers faithfully reported the pain in her feet, and the burning in her chest, and the slow, steady draining of her body's precious heat into the hungry air. And the girl walked on through all of it as if none of it were happening, as if the Deathworld were simply the morning, as if being ordinary here meant something the Sethri did not yet have a word for. "Continue the observation," Ian said. Her voice was even. Her long, pale fingers resting on the rim of the pool had gone very still. "We have seen one morning. We will need to see much more before we understand what we are looking at." It was the first time in 4 worlds that she had said such a thing, that they would need to understand rather than merely file. She did not notice she had said it, but Core did, and the young analyst said nothing and turned back to the girl in the dark and watched her walk. They watched her for 11 days before Ian admitted, even to herself, that something was wrong with the study. Nothing was wrong with the data. The observers were flawless. The measurements were clean. The girl did exactly what an ordinary human child did, which was the entire point. The trouble was that the ordinary human child, observed closely, would not stay ordinary. Each day the cadre sat down expecting to confirm weakness, and each day the girl handed them something the metrics could not hold. And by the 11th day, the reading pool was ringed with silent Sethri, who had stopped murmuring their comfortable murmur and started, instead, to watch. On the 2nd day they measured the walk again and mapped its cost precisely, and Core presented the figures with the flat voice of an analyst who has frightened himself. The girl's body, crossing 4 kilometers of frozen forest in the killing dark, expended energy at a rate the Sethri reserved for describing catastrophe. Her heart drove blood through her small frame at a pace that, sustained, should have exhausted her within the hour, and she sustained it for the hour, and then she sat down at a wooden desk in a heated room and did arithmetic. The recovery was the part Ian could not stop returning to. A Sethri pushed to that edge would have needed days of stillness and mineral broth to climb back from it. The girl climbed back from it in the time it took to remove her outer coverings. By the middle of the morning, her body had quietly repaired the damage, restocked what it had burned, and readied itself to do the whole thing again in the afternoon. It did this without her attention. She was not even aware it was happening. She was, the observers noted, thinking about something a teacher had said, and drawing small shapes in the margin of her work. "It self-repairs," Core said, "continuously, aggressively. We have been measuring the cost of what she does, Observer Prime, and the cost is real and it is enormous, but her body simply pays it over and over out of a reserve that keeps refilling. She is not enduring the Deathworld by hoarding her strength. She is enduring it by spending everything all the time and trusting that there will be more." He looked up. "We do not have a word for a creature that lives that way. Among us it would be called suicidal. Among them it appears to be called Tuesday." Ian did not reprimand the joke. She had noticed that the young analyst's jokes had gone thin and strange, the way a person laughs standing at a great height. On the 4th day the girl was hurt. It was a small thing, and that was what made it terrible. She was crossing the frozen river on her homeward walk, a shortcut, the observers determined, one she took to save the daylight, and the ice betrayed her, and she went down hard on it, and the whole cadre saw the impact through a dozen tiny eyes at once. A Sethri who fell that way would have broken. The girl's body absorbed the fall in a way that made Core enlarge the imagery and slow it, and study it frame by frame. The arm thrown out, the roll, the instinctive spending of the fall's force across the length of her, instead of into one fragile point. She struck the ice with force enough to bruise deep, and the observers watched the injury bloom beneath her skin, the small vessels breaking, the blood pooling, the pain signals racing up her spine in a bright screaming flood. And the girl said a short word that the translators marked as mild profanity, and got up and kept walking. "She is injured," Core said. "Genuinely. The tissue damage is significant. She will feel that for many days. Observer Prime, her nervous system is transmitting pain at an intensity that we would classify as debilitating, and she is—" He stopped and started again more quietly. "She is walking faster now, because the fall cost her time and the light is going and her brother will be waiting. The pain has not slowed her. It has been noted, filed, set beside all the other things she is carrying, and simply carried along with them." Ian watched the small figure limp hurry through the blue dusk, and she thought about her own people, and about a fact she had never before found remarkable, that in all the long history of the Sethri, no member of her species had ever continued a journey through pain. It was not cowardice. It was simple physics. A Sethri in pain was a Sethri whose body had reached the boundary of what it could survive, and to continue past that boundary was to die. Pain, for the Sethri, was the same word as stop. Their whole civilization was arranged so that no one ever had to feel it. And here was a small, weak human child treating the boundary of survivable agony as a thing to be walked through on the way home, because someone smaller than her was waiting, and the light was going. "Note it," Ian said, and her voice was not quite steady, and she was glad the cadre could not read the chemistry of a Sethri through the way their observers read the chemistry of the girl's blood. On the 6th day, they learned about the brother. The boy, Tomas, was sick. Not gravely. It was one of the endless small illnesses the human young endured as their fragile immune systems learned the Deathworld's teeming microbial library by the brutal method of being invaded by all of it in turn. But their female parent was gone to the care house through the dark hours, as she was every night, and so the sick boy was the girl's to keep, and the cadre watched the girl keep him. She did not sleep that night. The observers were precise about this. She did not sleep, and the loss of sleep degraded her, measurably, the way the metrics had promised it would. Her reaction times lengthened, her cognition dimmed, her body's self-repair faltered without the deep hours it needed to do its work. And through all of that degradation she rose, again and again, in the cold dark, to press her hand to the boy's forehead and read his fever by touch, to bring him water, to change the sweat-soaked coverings, to speak to him in a low voice the translators rendered as a stream of small nonsense and comfort. Near the middle of the night the boy woke frightened from a fever dream and cried, and the girl gathered him against her and held him, and the observers reported that her own body temperature had dropped again, because she had wrapped her warmth around him, and that her heartbeat was slow with exhaustion, and that the chemistry of her blood showed the particular signature of a body running far past the point where it should have stopped. And the boy quieted and slept, and the girl stayed awake holding him so that if he woke again she would be there. "Play the audio," Ian said. Core hesitated. "Observer Prime, it is only—" "Play it." He played it. Into the cold quiet of the quiet measure came the small tinny sound of a 13-year-old human girl, exhausted past speech, singing under her breath in the dark to a sick child, a wandering tuneless song about a boat on a river and where the river went, made up as she went along because she could not remember any real songs, her voice cracking with tiredness on the low notes, going on anyway. Going on and on into the small hours because the sound of it kept the boy asleep, and the sleep was mending him, and that was worth more than her own rest, worth more than her own warmth, worth more, the observer's cold arithmetic made unmistakably clear, than her own survival. The cadre listened to the whole of it. None of them said anything. When it ended, Ian realized that not one member of her observation cadre had murmured the comfortable murmur in 6 days, and that she could not remember the last time a room full of Sethri had been silent for so long. "She should be resting," Core finally said, and it came out almost pleading. The metrics are unambiguous. Every hour she spends awake, she is spending herself. She is 13 years old. Her body is still growing, it needs the sleep more than an adult's would. She knows this, the human young are taught it. She is not doing this because she does not understand the cost. She understands the cost perfectly. She is paying it anyway knowingly for a fever that will pass on its own, for a boy who will not remember this night because... He turned to Ian, and his young face had the open, undefended look of someone watching the ground he stood on turn out to be the roof of something vast. Because he is hers to keep. That is the entire reason. That is the whole of it. There is no advantage. There is no return. She has weighed her own survival against a small comfort for someone she loves, and she has decided her survival is the cheaper thing, and observer prime, she is right. In the human accounting, she is right. And they are all like this. 9 billion of them on a Deathworld, and this is not the exception. This is the baseline. This is the specimen we chose, because she was ordinary. Ian rose from the reading pool. She walked to the great port that looked down on the blue world, and she stood a long time in the light of it, and behind her the recording of the girl's tuneless river song played once more in someone's memory, because no one could quite let it go. She had come to this world certain of a thing, and the certainty was leaving her the way the girl's warmth left her body, measurably, into a cold and hungry dark. Endurance is the virtue of the prey animal, she had said 11 days ago, and she had believed it, because she was Sethri, and the Sethri had built a civilization on the wisdom of never approaching danger. But she saw now the flaw at the root of that wisdom, the flaw her people had never had to face because they had never met a thing like this. The Sethri measured danger by asking a single question: how easily can this be killed? By that question the human girl scored near the bottom of the index. She could be killed by a fall, by a cold night, by 3 days without water, by 1,000 casual cruelties of her own world. She was, exactly as the catalogue said, weak. And it did not matter. That was the thing the metrics had been screaming for 11 days, and that Ian, standing at the port, finally let herself hear. It did not matter how easily the girl could be killed, because the girl did not stop. You could hurt her and she kept walking. You could freeze her and she gave her warmth away and kept walking. You could exhaust her past the edge of collapse, and she rose in the dark to sing to a sick child and kept walking. The Sethri had spent 10,000 generations learning to measure the exact location of the boundary past which a body cannot go, and here was a species that had looked at that boundary, the same boundary, the real and lethal boundary, and simply decided that the things on the other side of it were sometimes worth reaching anyway. That was not tolerance. That was not the dumb persistence of a weed in a crack. It was a choice, made freshly every single day, by every single one of them, from the greatest to the smallest, from the strongest to a poor, unremarkable 13-year-old girl in a cold house at the edge of a black forest. The choice to spend everything. The choice to keep going past the place where going was survivable, because on the far side of that place there was something they loved. Observer Prime. Kor had come to stand beside her at the port. He kept his voice low as if the girl might hear it across the void. May I ask what we are measuring? I have been trying to find the metric. I have run her against every scale in the index: strength, speed, resilience, intelligence, technology. She is unremarkable on all of them. She is exactly what the ship promised. And yet I sit here every day and I am. He searched for the word, and used a Sethri one that did not translate cleanly, a word that meant the particular awe of a small creature that has just understood the size of the sea. I am this, every day more of it, and I do not know what I am measuring because we have no instrument for it. What is the name of the thing she has? Ian looked down at the turning world, at the northern dark where a light burned in one small window, where a girl sat awake holding a sleeping child, so that she would be there if he woke. I do not know its name, she said, but I know now why our catalogue was wrong. We measured how easily they die. We should have measured how hard they live. She was quiet a moment. Extend the study, cancel the seasonal limit. I want to see the whole of it now, Kor. not to confirm weakness. That question is answered. They are weak, and the answer is meaningless. I want to see how far it goes. I want to know what an ordinary human does when the ordinary is not enough. Because a species that spends everything on an ordinary day, I find I very much need to know what is left in it for a bad one. Cor bowed his long head. And if a bad one comes while we watch? Ian did not answer immediately. Below her the Deathworld turned, spitting ice and lightning and storm, patient and merciless, the cruelest cradle in the catalogue, and on its cold northern skin a small light burned against all of it and did not go out. Then, she said, we will finally see the thing our metrics have been too small to show us. And I think, Cor, that we should be afraid of it. Not the way we feared it in the catalogue. That fear was a mistake, a child's fear of a shadow. I mean the other kind, the kind that is very close to wonder. She turned from the port. Watch her, miss nothing. If the Deathworld ever truly comes for that child, I want to see exactly what she does. I have a suspicion, and I would give a great deal to be wrong about it, and I do not think I am. The cadre watched. The days shortened toward the deepest dark of the northern year. And below them, unknowing, the girl walked her frozen road, and kept her sleeping brother, and spent herself, and refilled and spent herself again, ordinary beyond all remark, carrying without complaint a weight that would have crushed the whole watching civilization above her, while over her head, in the shadow of the moon, a fragile people who had never in 10,000 years approached a danger leaned closer and closer to the light in the window, and could not look away. The extended study lasted 18 more days, and each of them added another stone to the strange weight the cadre was learning to carry. Ian had ordered them to watch how far it went, the spending, the refilling, the ordinary impossibility of a human life, and the girl obliged them without ever knowing she did, simply by living. There were no great events in those 18 days. That was the part the cadre could not get past. They had come from a species that recorded only exceptions, that memorialized the rare survival and the singular feat, and they sat now watching a child produce feat after feat that her own world did not even bother to name, and they began to understand that the humans had no word for most of what they did because to them it was not doing anything at all. It was only being. On the 9th day of the extension, the settlement's power failed. It was a small failure by human standards, a line brought down by ice somewhere in the Black Forest, and the observers watched the settlement lose its heat and its light in the middle of a cold afternoon, and respond not with panic but with a kind of practiced, weary competence that unsettled Ian more than panic would have. The humans did not wait to be saved. They saved each other. The observers, ranging out across the 4,000 souls of the settlement, found the same pattern repeating in house after house. The strong checking on the weak, the warm bringing fuel to the cold, the young sent to knock on the doors of the old, the whole settlement folding inward around its most fragile members the way the girl folded her warmth around her brother. No one directed it. There was no signal, no command. It was simply what they did reflexively the instant the Deathworld reached for them. They reached for each other first. And the girl, 13 years old, took her small brother by the hand and went out into the failing afternoon to check on the old woman who lived half a kilometer down the frozen road, because her mother was at the care house and someone had to, and the old woman was alone. The observers followed her the whole cold kilometer there and the whole cold kilometer back, and they logged the caloric cost and the pain of her still healing bruise from the river fall, and they watched her split the last of her own household's fuel and carry half of it down the road to a woman she was not related to and owed nothing, and sit with her until the woman's own family could come, and only then walk home in the dark with her brother, and only then build up her own fire, last of all, after everyone else was warm. She is 13, Cor said quietly, for what felt like the 100th time. He said it now less as an observation than as a kind of prayer, a thing he returned to when the data grew too large to hold. She has no obligation to that old woman, none. And it did not occur to her that she might not go, We have watched her decide 100 things in a month, Observer Prime, and I have come to notice that the hardest choices, the ones our whole civilization is arranged to help us avoid, she does not experience as choices at all. She does not agonize. She does not weigh. Someone is cold, and so she brings fuel. Someone is dying, and so she goes. The decision was made long before the moment came, made once, somewhere so deep in her that she cannot see the bottom of it, and all the moment does is ask her to act on a thing she settled before she was born. He shook his long head slowly. We are a species that has spent 10,000 years building machinery to keep us from ever having to make such choices. And they make them before breakfast and do not remember doing it. On the 12th day, they watched her fail at something, and it taught them more than any of her triumphs. She was working in the small hours after her brother slept, at a set of arithmetic problems that were plainly beyond her. The observers could read the numbers on the page and the strain in her nervous system as she bent over them by the light of a single failing bulb. She got them wrong. She got them wrong again. Her body was tired, degraded by another night of short sleep, and her frustration built until the observers registered the chemistry of it flooding her blood, the human signature of a mind at the end of its patience. She put her head down on the desk. For a long moment she did not move, and the cadre watched, and some of them. Ian saw it in the stillness around the pool. Some of them were hoping, without admitting it, that here at last was the ordinary limit, the place where even a human simply stopped. She lifted her head, she wiped her face. And she started the problem again from the beginning, slower this time, and got it wrong a fourth time, and started it a fifth, and somewhere near the middle of the night, the observers watched the moment the thing came clear to her, watched the small physical change that ran through her whole body when the arithmetic finally yielded, the straightening, the quick indrawn breath, the private fierce satisfaction of a mind that had refused to be beaten by a page of numbers at the edge of a black forest, in the deep of winter for no reward, but the answer itself. She could have stopped, said the old analyst wonderingly. There was no cost to stopping. No one would have known, the problem did not matter, and she went back to it 5 times because he trailed off. Because it had beaten her, Ian finished, and she would not allow the beating to be the end of the story. It is the same thing, do you see? It is the river fall and the sick brother and the old woman's fuel and the arithmetic. It is all the same single thing, expressed in 1,000 daily forms too small for us to have ever noticed. They do not accept the boundary. Not the boundary of survival, and not the boundary of a hard problem, and not the boundary of a cold night. Every one of them in every hour is quietly refusing some edge that the rest of the catalogue would simply have stopped at. And the refusing costs them. We have measured the cost. It is real, it is enormous. It is written in every panel of her blood chemistry. They pay it. They pay it constantly, cheerfully, without seeming to notice they are paying anything at all, and then they wake up and pay it again. She was silent a while, watching the girl close her book and put out the light and go, at last, too late, to few hours of sleep before another frozen morning. I have led 4 catalogues, Ian said finally to no one to the turning world. I have filed 4 young species beneath us, and I was right too, and I have never once lost sleep over any of them. And I sit here now afraid to close my own eyes, because every time I do I see a small human girl going back to a problem that had already beaten her 5 times for nothing in the cold, and I understand that we have found at the far edge of the catalogue the one thing our whole science was built to protect us from ever meeting, a species that does not know how to be stopped, that does not have the word, that has never needed it. She turned from the port. Continue the study, to the end. I want the founders to have all of it, every ordinary day, every unremarkable feat, every casual crossing of an edge that would have killed us. Let no one who comes after be able to say that we did not warn them. Let it all be written down, so that when the humans finally lift their eyes to the stars, whichever of us is here to meet them will at least know the truth the catalogue was too small to hold. She looked once more at the small dark window. They are not strong. Remember that, all of you. They are weak, and it is the most dangerous thing about them, and I do not think we will ever be able to explain to anyone who has not watched it why that sentence is true. The 18 days ran out. The deep dark of the northern year came on, and with it, wheeling down off the pole, the great white spiral of the storm. And the cadre, who had begun the voyage certain they were studying prey, turned their instruments toward the coming violence and found that they were no longer afraid for the girl's world. They were afraid of what her world had taught her to be. The storm came out of the north like a decision the world had made. The quiet measure saw it 3 days before it arrived, a vast white spiral wheeling down off the pole, and the ship's mind rendered its violence into numbers that made the whole cadre go quiet in the old way, the frightened way. Winds that would peel the skin from a Sethri. Cold beyond the killing cold, a cold that could stop a human heart in the open in less than an hour. Snow measured not in depth but in the erasure of everything, of roads, of landmarks, of the difference between the ground and the sky. The settlement's own transmissions had names for it, urgent names, and the humans were doing what the observers had learned humans did in the face of their world's cruelty, which was to prepare, methodically, and then to go on living inside the threat as though it were weather, which it was. They are not evacuating, Kor said. He had watched the settlement for an hour. They are buying food, filling containers with water, bringing fuel indoors. The care house is doubling its watch. They speak of it on their channels the way one speaks of a difficult guest. They are frightened, Observer Prime. The fear is in their voices, real fear. They know exactly what this storm can do to them. And they are staying. All of them. They will close their doors and wait inside the thing that can kill them. And in the morning, if the morning comes, they will open the doors and dig themselves out and go on. Ian studied the white spiral and the girl's household. Kor's answer was slow. The female parent is required at the care house through the storm. The sick and the aged cannot be left. The humans do not abandon their weak, Observer Prime, not even to save themselves. We have confirmed this across the whole settlement. It is a fixed law of them. So she will go to her work across the settlement before the worst arrives. And the 2 children will be alone in the house at the edge of the forest, the girl and the small boy. He was quiet. For the duration, however long it lasts, the nearest other dwelling is half a kilometer distant. If anything happens to them in the storm, no one will know, and no one could reach them if they did. The cadre absorbed this. On the reading pool, the small house sat at the black forest's edge, and around it the invisible arithmetic of the coming storm tightened like a closing hand. It was then that Kor asked to descend. He asked it quietly, as a formal petition, standing before the Observer Prime in the presence of the whole cadre, and the request was so far outside the 10,000-year custom of the Sethri that for a moment no one understood he had made it. The Sethri did not descend. The Sethri never descended. To place a fragile body inside a danger, when a mote of dust could observe it from safety, was to every Sethri instinct a kind of madness, a violation of the founding wisdom of the species. In 4 worlds and a long career, Ian had never heard the request spoken aloud. "Explain yourself," she said. "I have watched her for 29 days, Kor said. I have measured every heartbeat, every degree of heat, every firing of every nerve. I have the most complete record of an ordinary human life ever assembled, and Observer Prime. I understand none of it. The numbers are perfect and they are empty. I can tell you the exact caloric cost of the night she sang to her brother. I cannot tell you why it undid me to hear it. There is a thing in these people that our instruments pass straight through, the way light passes through us, and I have come to believe that it cannot be measured from a distance, because distance is the whole of our method and our method has failed." He drew himself up, all his young translucence catching the light. "The founders taught us never to approach danger, but they also taught us that the purpose of a Sethri is to understand. I do not think we can understand this one from the shadow of the moon. I think someone has to go and stand close enough to be in it. I think someone has to see. You would die, Ian said flatly. The storm will make the surface lethal to you in minutes. The pod cannot hold against those winds. You are asking to carry a Sethri body into a high-index death world at the moment of its greatest violence, for no gain the instruments can name. Every law of our people forbids it. Every law of our people, Kor said quietly, was written by a species that had never met these people. Observer Prime, she gives her warmth away in the dark. She walks through pain because someone smaller is waiting. She spends her own survival on things that will not even remember her. I have spent 29 days deciding that this is the most important thing I have ever seen, and I cannot go on watching it from a place of perfect safety and pretend that I have understood it. That would be the true cowardice, not the fear of the storm, the fear of ever being close to anything. He lowered his head. You said it yourself. We measured how easily they die. I want, for 1 hour, to try to measure how hard they live, and I do not think it can be done from here. The silence that followed was the longest of the whole voyage. Ian looked at the young analyst, and then at the white spiral wheeling down toward the small house at the forest's edge, and she felt the two halves of 10,000 years pulling against each other inside her, the ancient wisdom of the fragile which said flee, and the newer, stranger thing the girl had put in her, which had no name yet but which said the same word the girl's whole species seemed to live by. Go anyway. She was the Observer Prime. The law was hers to keep. And she found, to her own quiet astonishment, that she could not bring herself to keep it. You will take the reinforced pod, she said at last. You will set down at the tree line at distance, and you will not approach the dwelling. You will observe, and when the storm's leading edge arrives you will lift immediately and return. This is not a descent into the Deathworld core. It is a step toward its threshold, no more. Do you understand me? I understand, said Kor, who did not quite, and neither did she. The pod fell through the corrosive sky as the light was dying. It was a small, strong thing, grown and layered against pressure and heat, the safest object the Sethri could build, and it set down among the black trees a 1/4 kilometer from the house exactly as ordered, and Kor sat inside it with the storm not yet arrived and looked out through his own eyes, for the first time in his life, at a Deathworld surface. It was more than the observers had shown him. The cold pressed against the pod's skin like a living thing. The trees groaned. The last light lay blue and bruised along the snow, and 1/2 kilometer off, the small house held its single lit window against the coming dark, and Kor understood, sitting there, that no measurement he had ever taken had prepared him for how it felt to be near it, to be a fragile thing inside the same danger the girl lived in every day, and to know that she was in it right now, unafraid, keeping her brother, ordinary. Then the storm arrived, and it arrived early, and it arrived wrong. The ship's mind had misjudged the spiral by 2 hours, a small error, a rounding in the chaos of a Deathworld's weather, the kind of error that meant nothing to a species that observed from orbit and everything to a fragile body on the ground. The leading edge came not as a rising wind but as a wall, a white avalanche of air that struck the tree line like a fist, and Kor had time to begin the lift sequence and no time at all to complete it. The wind took the pod. It lifted the small, strong, safe object off the snow and flung it, tumbling through the black trees, and the trees did to it what the catalogue had said the Deathworld did to fragile things, broke it, opened it, spilled it, and it came to rest at last on its side in a drift at the edge of the frozen river, its skin cracked, its warmth bleeding out into the storm, and its systems dying one by one in the cold. On the quiet measure the reading pool erupted. Ian was on her feet. Kor, respond. His voice came thin and broken through the failing link. I am the pod is breached. The cold is coming in. My systems, Observer Prime, my thermal reserve is a silence full of wind. It is very cold. I did not know it would be like this. The numbers did not. Another silence. I cannot lift. The pod cannot lift. I am on the surface of the Deathworld and I cannot leave it, and the storm is only beginning. A sound the translators could not render, small and frightened and young. I am sorry, Observer Prime. You told me. You told me it was madness. I only wanted to see. Ian's mind, the disciplined mind of 4 catalogued worlds, ran the numbers she did not want to run. The nearest Sethri rescue capacity was aboard the quiet measure in the shadow of the moon, and it could not descend into that storm any more than Kor's pod could climb out of it. The corrosive air, the killing winds, the erasing snow. The Deathworld had closed over her analyst like water over a stone, and every law of her fragile people said the same cold, true thing. He was already gone. There was nothing to be done. One did not approach a danger like that. One grieved, and one filed the loss, and one carried the lesson home. That was the wisdom of 10,000 years. And Ian, watching the thermal signature of the young Sethri begin its slow slide toward the dark, found that she no longer believed a word of it, because for 29 days she had been watching a species that did not believe it either, and one of them was very close. "Where is the girl?" she said. Her voice was strange in her own throat. "The observers, we still have observers on the girl. Where is she?" Kor's failing pod was half a kilometer from the house, and the house held its window against the storm, and inside it a 13-year-old girl had just felt the whole building shudder under the storm's first blow, and had gone to the window to look out at the white erasure of the world, and had seen. The observers caught it. The observers that were still faithfully measuring her heartbeat and the chemistry of her blood. She had seen, far off through the driving snow, at the edge of the frozen river where nothing should be, a small strange dying light. The observers reported that her heart rate rose. They reported the chemical signature of fear entering her blood, real fear, the honest fear of a fragile creature that knows exactly what the storm outside can do. And then they reported that she was pulling on her coverings. "No," Ian breathed at the port to a girl who could not hear her, half a world away and 13 years old. "No, child, not into that, not for a stranger, not for a light you do not understand. Stay in your house, keep your brother. You do not owe the dark this. Stay where it is warm." But she already knew. She had known, she realized, since the 6th night, since the tuneless song about the boat and the river, known what an ordinary human did when it saw a dying light in a killing storm, because she had spent a month learning that there was nothing ordinary about them at all. The girl spoke a few words to her frightened brother, low and steady, and set him back from the door, and wrapped herself against the cold that could stop her heart. And Ian watched, unable to look away, as the smallest and weakest and most unremarkable human on the entire Deathworld opened her door onto the worst it had, and stepped out into it alone, to go and find out who was dying. The whole cadre gathered at the reading pool, and no one gave the order, and no one needed to. Every observer they had was turned upon the girl. Whatever happened in the next hour on the frozen river, the Sethri were going to witness all of it, because their friend was dying at the bottom of the storm, and a small human child was walking into that storm to reach him, and there was not one thing any of them could do but watch and measure, and pray to nothing in particular that the numbers would come out kind. The storm had made the world into a single white roar. The observers, riding it, reported conditions past the edge of their scales. Wind that drove the snow horizontal, cold that the girl's own body could not hold against for long, a darkness so total that the difference between the sky and the ground and the trees had been erased into one blind, screaming white. Into this the girl walked. She had brought a light of her own, a small handheld human thing, and its beam died 3 arm lengths out into the snow, and she walked past the reach of her own light into the dark because the other light, the strange dying one, was still out there, and she had marked its direction before the storm swallowed it, and she was holding to that direction with everything she had. "She cannot see," Kor's voice came, thin and slurred now with the cold. His pod was a broken shell filling slowly with the Deathworld. "Observer Prime, tell her, there is no way to tell her, she cannot see the river ice, it is not safe if she," his voice guttered. "Why is she coming? She does not know what I am, she does not know if I am a danger. Why would she walk into this for a light? It is not. The numbers do not. There is no reason. There is no reason for her to be out here. There is a reason, Ian said quietly, watching. It is only that it is not a reason we have ever had a name for. Keep talking, Core. Keep your systems warm however you can. She is coming. Against all the wisdom of both our worlds, she is coming, and I do not think she is going to stop. The girl fell twice on the way. The observers logged each fall, the impact, the cost, the bright flood of pain, and both times she rose the way they had watched her rise a dozen times before, the way her whole species rose, as though falling were simply a part of moving and not a reason to stay down. Her body was in trouble now. The metrics said so plainly. Her core temperature was dropping past the safe band into the range the catalogue had marked in warning colors, the range where a human heart begins to labor and a human mind begins to slow and wander. Her fingers had stopped reporting sensation. Her breath came ragged. She was, by every measure the Sethri owned, a fragile creature being killed by her world, exactly as the catalogue had promised on the first day. And she went on into the white, one falling step and then another, calling out now, her voice torn to nothing by the wind, calling out into the storm to whatever was dying out there that she was coming, that she was almost there, that it should hold on. Hold on. The observers caught the words and the translators rendered them, and the whole cadre heard a 13-year-old human girl, freezing to death on the surface of a Deathworld, spending the last of her own failing warmth to shout comfort to a stranger she could not see. Hold on. I'm coming. Hold on. And Core, dying in the broken pod, heard it too. Not the words, his translator was long dead, but the sound of it, the human sound cutting through the roar, a voice coming toward him through the worst the universe had, and he said in a whisper the failing link barely carried, "She is singing. Observer Prime, she is no. She is calling to me. She does not know what I am, and she is calling to me through the storm so that I will know I am not alone in it." A silence. I have measured this species for 29 days, and I never once measured this, because it cannot be measured, because it is the thing itself. It is the whole of it, it is. His voice broke entirely and then came back, small and clear and unafraid. I am not frightened anymore, Observer Prime, whatever happens. I came to see, and I am seeing it. I am seeing what they are. It was worth the coming. She found the pod because she nearly fell over it. The observers watched her collapse against the broken shell in the white dark, her hands finding its cracked skin, and they watched her understand, in the space of a few frozen breaths, that this was the source of the light, and that there was something alive inside it. She could not have known what Core was. The catalogue had been very clear that humans had never confirmed a single non-human sapient. To the girl, this thing in the snow was outside the whole of her experience, a strangeness from nowhere, and the Deathworld had taught her species 1,000 hard lessons about strange things that might be dangerous. Ian watched the girl's blood chemistry and saw the fear spike in it, the ancient prey animal fear, the sensible fear. And she watched the girl reach into the broken pod anyway, into the cold and the strangeness and the unknown, and take hold of the dying Sethri with her ruined, frozen hands, because it was alive and it was hurt and it was going to die if she did not, and that for a human was the end of the argument. That was where all the weighing stopped. Not what is this? Not is it safe? Only, it is dying and I am here. She is trying to move me, Core said, wondering. I am nearly her own mass. She cannot possibly, she is not strong, Observer Prime, the metrics say she is not strong. But strength had never been the thing. They all understood that now, the whole silent cadre, watching a weak human child do an impossible thing in the dark. She could not carry him, so she did not carry him. She dragged him. She got her frozen arms beneath the broken body of a creature she had never seen and had every reason to fear, and she hauled it out of the ruined pod into the screaming storm, and she put her failing warmth against its cold and began, step by falling step, to pull it back the way she had come. Toward the light in the window, toward the small warm house at the edge of the black forest, toward the only safety on the whole killing world, 1/2 kilometer off through the worst storm of the northern year, dragging nearly her own weight, freezing, exhausted in the dark, with her own heart laboring in the warning-colored range where human hearts begin to fail. The metrics went bad slowly and then fast. Ian read them and could not stop reading them. The girl's core temperature fell. Her body was spending itself now past the deep reserve, past the refilling well the cadre had marveled at, spending the last true bottom of what a human body held. Every measure said stop. Every measure the Sethri owned, the same measures that ruled their whole civilization, screamed the single word that was the foundation of their people. Stop, stop. You have reached the boundary, past here is death, stop. And the girl did not stop. She had never once stopped. Not on the first frozen morning, not through the pain of the fall, not through the sleepless fevered night, and not now, dragging a dying stranger through the end of the world. Because on the far side of the boundary there was something that needed her, and that was the only fact that had ever mattered to her kind. Ian. It was the first time Cor had ever used her name without her title, and he did it dying in a whisper as the girl hauled him another step through the dark. Ian, I understand it now. The thing we could not measure, do you want to know what it is? His voice was fading. It is not that they are strong. We were right, they are weak. It is that they have decided, all of them every day, the weakest, most ordinary one of them, that the boundary is not the end of the argument, that there is something on the other side of dying that is worth walking toward. We built 10,000 years on the wisdom that nothing is worth approaching death for, and they are built on the opposite. That is the whole difference between our peoples, Ian. That is why their weakness does not matter. You cannot stop a thing that has already decided the boundary means nothing. You can only kill it and it will spend its dying reaching you anyway. A silence. She is going to reach me. I can feel her. She is going to spend her own life and reach me, and I do not think there is any force in the catalogue that could have stopped her. Not the storm, not the cold, not the whole of the Deathworld. Nothing. She is the most terrifying thing I have ever seen, and she is 13 years old, and she is nobody, and she is carrying me home. The door of the small house opened at the edge of the black forest. The observers and the whole silent cadre, and Ian at the port with her long pale hands pressed against the cold glass, watched a 13-year-old girl fall through her own doorway out of the killing dark, dragging behind her the broken body of a creature from another star, and collapse, and rise again, because the door had to be shut against the storm and her brother was crying, and the stranger was still cold. They watched her shove the door closed against the white roar. They watched her, with the last of a body that had nothing left, pull the alien thing to the small fire at the center of the house and begin to wrap it in every covering she owned, the same warmth she was always giving away, pressed now around a shape she did not understand and had nearly died to save. They watched her fall to her knees beside it, shaking, frostbitten, her core temperature only now beginning its slow, terrible climb back from the warning range, her small, frightened brother clinging to her side, and they watched her, this weak, ordinary, unremarkable child, put a ruined hand against the cold, strange face of the dying Sethri and say the thing that Cor's translator, warming at last by the human fire, caught and carried up through the storm to the ship in the shadow of the moon. The first words the Sethri ever heard a human speak directly to one of their own. "You're safe now," the girl said to a creature from another world through a throat wrecked with cold. "I've got you. You're safe. Just hold on. I've got you." The night the girl kept Cor alive was the longest the Sethri had ever measured, and the cadre lived every hour of it at the reading pool, unable to eat, unable to rest, bound to the small, warm house at the edge of the black forest by a thread of failing signal, and a thing none of them yet had a name for. The storm did not relent. It worked at the house all night the way the sea works at a stone, and the observers reported the small building shuddering under each new blow, the cold pressing at every seam, the killing white pressed to the single lit window like a face. And inside it, by the light of a fire she fed a stick at a time to make it last, a 13-year-old girl fought the Deathworld for the life of a creature from another star, and did not once consider losing. She could not warm him the way his body needed. She did not know the way his body needed. So she did the only thing she knew, which was everything. She wrapped him in every covering the house owned, and then, when the observer's instruments showed his temperature still sliding toward the dark, she lay down against the broken alien shape and gave him the heat of her own body, the same warmth she had been giving away her whole life, and her core temperature, already dragged into the warning range by the storm, dropped again, and the cadre watched two thermal signatures, the human and the Sethri, drift toward each other in the cold, one falling to lift the other, and could not tell for a long terrible while whether the girl was saving Core or simply dying beside him. "She is spending herself past the reserve," said the old analyst, and his voice was not steady. "Observer Prime, there is a bottom to even a human. We have never seen one reach it. She is reaching it. If she gives him any more heat, she will not have enough left to." "I know," Ian said. "Then we must hope she stops." "She will not stop," Ian said. "We have watched her for 47 days. She has never once stopped. You are asking the storm to teach her a thing her whole world could not." And they watched, and the girl did not stop, and somewhere in the deepest hour of the night, the two thermal signatures reached a balance so fine that the ship's own instruments could barely hold it. The exact point at which a human body, spending the last true bottom of itself, gives just enough and no more, holds a stranger on the living side of the boundary by a margin measured in fractions of a degree, and holds herself there too, on will alone, on the refusal that her species carried in place of caution. Twice in the night the small brother woke and cried, frightened of the storm and the strange cold thing by the fire, and both times the girl gathered the last of her strength to soothe him. The observers caught her voice, wrecked and shaking and impossibly gentle, telling him it was all right, that the visitor was only lost and cold, that they were going to keep it warm until morning the way they would want to be kept warm if they were lost, and that the storm could not come in, not through this door, not tonight, not while she was here. And the boy believed her because she said it, because she had never once in his short life failed to be the thing that stood between him and the dark, and he slept, and she went back to the cold work of keeping a stranger alive. Core drifted at the edge of consciousness through all of it, and the failing link carried his thoughts up to the ship in fragments, and the cadre received them like a testament. "She thinks I am afraid of the storm," he murmured once, wondering. "She keeps telling me it cannot come in. She is telling the storm it cannot have me, as though it were a thing that could be forbidden, as though a small human voice at a small human fire could stand at the door of the whole Deathworld and simply say no, not this one, not tonight." A long silence full of wind. "Observer Prime, I think that is exactly what she is doing, and I think it is working. I think the reason 9 billion of them live on the surface of a world that should have killed every one of them is that each of them in their own small house stands every night at the door and tells the dark it cannot come in, and means it, and the dark, against all reason, against all our metrics, believes them often enough that they endure." His thought grew faint. "We have been asking the wrong question all along. We kept asking how they survive the Deathworld. That is not the question. The question is how the Deathworld survives them. It has been trying to kill this one child for 13 years, and it has thrown its worst storm at her tonight, and she is winning, Ian. A weak, ordinary, freezing child is winning at the door of her small house, and she does not even know she is fighting." Near the end of the night, the girl herself began to fail. The observers logged it with brutal precision. Her shivering slowed, which the catalogue marked in its darkest warning colors, the sign of a human body so far gone into the cold that it can no longer defend itself. Her thoughts, caught in the slur of her movements, wandered. The cadre watched her sway where she lay, watched her own furnace guttering at last after a night of feeding its heat to a stranger, and Ian stood at the port with her hands pressed white against the glass, and understood that she was about to watch the girl die. That the child had spent past the true bottom after all, that there had been a limit, and love had carried her over it, and now the Deathworld was going to collect. And the girl reached out one frozen, failing hand, and laid it on the broken alien shape beside her, and felt. The observers confirmed it, the instruments were certain. felt that the stranger was warmer than she was now, that she had won, that the thing she had dragged from the storm was going to live. And that knowledge, the cadre watched it happen, that single fact reached down into a body that had nothing left and found something underneath the nothing, some final reserve that was not in any of the Sethri metrics, because it was not chemical and not muscular, and not anything an instrument could weigh. And the girl pulled her brother close on one side and the warming stranger close on the other, and set her jaw and held on. Held on. Not because her body could. Because she had decided, somewhere below the place where deciding happens, that these two were hers to keep, and that the morning was coming, and that she would be there when it did. The morning came. It found all three of them alive at the edge of the Black Forest, and the cadre, who had not moved from the reading pool in 12 hours, let out a sound together that no Sethri gathering had ever made before. Not the comfortable murmur of the fragile finding something more fragile, but its opposite, a long, low note of awe from a fragile people who had just watched the smallest weak thing on a killing world stand at the door all night and tell the dark it could not come in and be believed. Kor did not die. The girl kept him alive through the long white night with the only tools her species had ever needed against the Deathworld, warmth and stubbornness, and the refusal to let a living thing go into the dark alone. She did not understand his biology. She understood that he was cold, and so she gave him her fire and her coverings, and when those were not enough, the heat of her own frostbitten body, curled against the broken alien shape through the worst of the storm with her frightened brother pressed to her other side. The three of them a single small warmth at the edge of the Black Forest, while the world outside tried all night to erase them and could not. The observers measured it all. They measured the exact heat that passed from the human child into the failing Sethri, and did the arithmetic, and found that it was, by the narrowest possible margin, enough. That a body spending the last of itself had spent just enough to hold a stranger on the living side of the boundary, until the morning came. And the morning came. It always came, on the Deathworld. That was the thing the humans had known all along, and the Sethri were only now beginning to understand. The storm wore itself out against the patient world, and a thin cold light crept back into the sky, and in the small house at the forest's edge, a 13-year-old girl woke stiff and hurting and frostbitten beside a creature from another star. And the first thing she did, the observers caught it, and it was the thing Ian carried with her for the rest of her long life. The first thing the girl did was check that the stranger was still breathing, and then check on her brother, and then, satisfied that the things in her keeping had survived the night, she began quietly to build up the fire again, because they would all be cold when they fully woke, and someone had to keep them warm. Aboard the quiet measure, in the shadow of the moon, Observer Prime Ian turned from the reading pool and faced her cadre, and she gave the last orders of the study. "Bring him home," she said. "The moment the sky is clear enough for a second pod to descend without a second disaster, bring Kor home, quietly. She must not be burdened with the knowledge of what she saved or what watched her save it. That is a weight the humans have not yet been asked to carry, and it is not ours to lay on a child. Leave her the mystery. Leave her the memory of a strange light she pulled out of the storm. It is enough." "And the catalogue?" asked the eldest of the cadre, an analyst nearly as old as Ian herself. "The founders require a classification, Observer Prime, a single index. Where do we file this world?" Ian was quiet a long moment. Below her the Deathworld turned, catching the light, savage and beautiful, wheeling its storms and its lightning and its shaking ground beneath a thin skin of 9 billion fragile creatures who walked out into all of it every single day and called it ordinary. She thought about the first day, and the comfortable murmur of a fragile people finding something more fragile than themselves. She thought about how easily the girl could be killed, and how completely it did not matter. She thought about a small tuneless song about a boat and a river, sung in the dark by a body spending itself past all sense, and she understood at last the thing that no metric in the whole index of the reach had been built to hold. "Write this," Ian said, and her voice carried to every corner of the silent ship. "The subject species is designated human. By every environmental and physiological metric, the species is weak, fragile of body, brief of life, without armor or venom or natural weapon, easily and readily killed. This assessment is confirmed. It is also meaningless." The cadre was very still. "Write that we made an error at the root of our science," she went on. "For 10,000 generations we have measured danger by a single question: how easily can a thing be killed? And by that question we have kept ourselves safe and small and alive, and we have never once met a species for whom the question does not apply. We have met one now. Write that the humans cannot be measured by how easily they die, because dying is not the boundary of their behavior. Every other catalogue species, ourselves the foremost among them, treats the edge of survival as a wall, the place past which one does not go. The humans treat it as a doorway. They walk through it knowingly, freely, on ordinary days, for ordinary reasons, for a sick child, for a stranger's light, for a warmth to give away in the cold. Their whole civilization is built on the single principle that there are things on the far side of dying worth reaching, and that a life is measured not by how carefully it is kept, but by how fully it is spent." She turned back to the port, to the small northern dwelling where a light burned in the returning morning. "Write that we studied this species as a weak one," she said, "and that we were correct, and that our correctness was the most dangerous mistake we have ever made, because we spent our study waiting for their weakness to become their doom, and instead we watched their weakness become the least important thing about them. We watched an ordinary child, chosen because she was ordinary, chosen because she was the smallest and poorest and most unremarkable of all of them, do the single most impossible thing this cadre has ever witnessed, without training, without strength, without any advantage at all, because it did not occur to her that a dying thing in a storm was anyone's to save but hers. And write this last, and write it plainly for the founders to read, because it is the true finding of this voyage, and everything else is only numbers." Her long pale hands pressed flat against the cold glass. "We came to this world afraid of the wrong thing. We feared that the humans might be strong. They are not. The truth is far worse, and there is no defense that our people or any people could ever raise against it. The humans are ordinary. And they're ordinary, the plain, unremarkable, everyday baseline of the weakest child among them, is a thing that walks into Deathworlds for love and does not stop. If this species should ever decide that we are on the far side of some boundary they wish to cross, there will be no wall high enough, no cold deep enough, no storm wide enough to keep them from reaching us, and they will spend their last dying breath doing it, and they will think it was nothing. They will think it was ordinary. That is what they are. File the world where the truth demands. File it above us. File it first. And mark it for every Sethri who comes after, with the one warning our whole careful science was too small to give. Do not mistake how easily a thing can die for how easily it can be stopped. We made that mistake. We very nearly killed one of our own by making it. And the thing that saved him was the most terrifying thing in the catalogue, and it was a girl, and she was 13 years old, and she was nobody at all. They brought Core home 2 days later, on a clear, cold dawn, and the girl never knew that the strange light she pulled from the storm had risen back into the sky to carry her story to the stars. The observers lifted from the small house one by one, their work complete, and the last of them lingered a moment before it went, faithful to the end, measuring to the end, and it recorded the girl stepping out of her door into an ordinary frozen morning, 4 kilometers of black forest between her and her school, her brother's hand in hers, her body still healing from a night that should have ended her, walking out into the death world the way she did every day, the way her whole species did. Without complaint, without wonder, without the faintest idea that anything about her was remarkable at all. And far above her, a fragile people who had never in 10,000 years approached a danger turned their ship for home, carrying with them the one measurement their science had never thought to take, and the memory of a light in a window that would not go out, having come, at last, All this way across the dark, only to see, and having seen, to understand that the most terrifying force in all the catalogue of worlds was not the strong, and not the armed, and not the swift, but a small, ordinary girl on a killing world who looked at the boundary past which nothing should go, and stepped over it into the storm, because someone on the other side needed her, and that was the only reason she had ever needed, and it was enough.